Good morning, dear students. I, Vijayalakshmi, your teacher of English, going to deliver lecture 2 of chapter 1, A Triumph of Surgery by James Harriet. Let's have a quick review. First of all, in our first lecture, we came to know that the story A Triumph of Surgery is a is an account of an overfed dog who has become very fat and sick due to the excessive feeding. Due to his owner, Mrs. Pamphray, who is foolishly indulgent, and she claims that Tricky's listlessness is an outcome of malnutrition. The main characters of the story are the dog Tricky, narrator Mr. James Harriet, who is a veterinary surgeon, and Mrs. Pamphray, who is a very rich lady and much concerned about her pet dog Tricky. So let's continue with another part of the story. So come on, let's continue with the next part. In it, the narrator says, I tried to sound severe. Now I really mean this. If you don't cut his food right down and give him more exercise, he's going to be really ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on a very strict diet. Here, who is the speaker? The speaker is Mr. James Harriet, and to whom he is talking to? He is talking to the mistress of Tricky, Mrs. Pamphray, and he is guiding her, instructing her that she must cut down the food, the amount of the food which she was giving to the dog Tricky. He told her that the dog was getting ill due to bad eating habit. He says, you must harden your heart. You must be very strict. And you should give strict diet to your dog if you want that he should be all right. Now, hearing this, Mrs. Pamphray wrung her hands. Oh, I will, Mr. Harriet. I'm sure you are right. But it is so difficult, so very difficult. She set off, head down, along the road as if determined to put the new regime into practice immediately. Now you see, in this paragraph, she became determined and told Mr. Harriet that yes, although it is difficult, but still I have decided I'll definitely take care of Tricky much more than earlier, and I'll be very concerned about him. Now, the narrator says, I watched their progress with growing concern. Tricky was tottering along in his little tweed coat. He had a whole wardrobe of these coats for the cold weather and a raincoat for the wet days. He struggled on, dropping in his harness. Now, here, Mr. Harriet is explaining to us that Tricky was also a rich dog, because in his wardrobe he had all kind of coats for cold weather, raincoat for rainy days, and because he too was having all the delicacies of life due to the rich mistress Mrs. Pamphray. The expected call came within a few days. Mrs. Pamphray was distraught. Tricky would eat nothing, refused even his favorite dishes. And besides, he had bouts of vomiting. He spent all his time lying on a rug, panting, didn't want to go for walks, didn't want to do anything. I had made my plans in advance. The only way was to get Ricky out of the house for a period. Now, what happened? As the narrator, Mr. James Harriet, was expecting that a few days back, after a few days, the call would definitely come, and the same happened. Mrs. Pemprey called Mr. Harriet. She was very sad. She reported that Ricky was not eating anything. He refused even his favorite dishes. And additionally, he had bouts of vomiting. He spent all his time lying on the mat. Panting means he was having difficulty in breathing. He did not want to go for walk, didn't want to do anything. It means the condition of Ricky was critical and Mrs. Pamphray was much worried about it. So she called Mr. Harriet. Mr. Harriet, the narrator, he says that I had made my plans in advance. He said that he had already planned something. He had decided that the only way was to get Ricky out of the house for a period. If he would be away from Famfrey, Mrs. Famfrey, his owner, then only he would be all right. Now the narrator says that I suggested that he be hospitalized for about a fortnight. Fortnight means a period of 15 days and to be kept under observation. So, who is the speaker here? Here, the speaker is Mr. James Harriet, to whom he is suggesting to Mrs. Pamphray about whose health? About the health of Tricky. The poor lady almost swooned. She felt very bad. She was concerned, feeling unconscious. She was sure he would die fine and die if he did not see her every day. Because she loved Tricky a lot. That's why she felt that he would die. She would definitely die if she would remain away from Tricky. But I took a firm line. Tricky was very ill, and this was the only way to save him. In fact, I thought it best to take him without delay, and followed by Mrs. Pemprey's wailings, I marched out of the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. Now, Mr. James Harriet says, although Mrs. Pemprey did not want that I took the Tricky to the hospital. But due to his bad health, I thought it was the only way to save the dog. So, without delay, and in spite of all the wailings, all the cry, all the excuses of Mrs. Pamphray, the narrator marched out of the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. The entire staff was roused and maids rushed in and out, bringing his day bed, his night bed, favorite cushions, toys, rubber rings, breakfast ball, lunch ball, supper ball. The entire staff refers to the servants and the maids that were working in the house of Mrs. Pamphray, because she is a rich lady. There are many servants who were taking care of this pet Tricky. So, realizing that my car would never hold all the stuff, I started to drive away. As I moved off, Mrs. Pamphret, with a despairing cry, threw an armful of the little coats through the window. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner of the drive. Everybody was in tears. This is the scene of the house of Mrs. Pamphret. This is a good house where many servants, many maids are there. All are there to take care of Tricky, that ill dog. Out of the road, I glanced down at the pathetic little animal gasping on the seat by my side. Now, James Harriet, he says that I looked out of my car and I noticed that the scene of the house or the people of the house was very bad. They all were crying, they all were concerned, they all were feeling bad as they were separating from the dog Tricky. And now narrator looked at the pathetic, the fearful, the poor condition of the dog who was there on the seat by his side. I patted the head and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. Poor old lad, I said. You haven't kick in you, but I think I know a cure for. Now here he gave him a good touch and realizes the dog and made the dog realizes that really he is concerned for him and he will definitely cure him, which was the need of the hour.